My true story from Illinois. They said, "You eat but don't help," after I paid the mortgage. If this story touched your heart even just a little, feel free to leave a comment below. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, you're warmly invited to subscribe. We'd love to have you here. My name is Dorothy Mae Henderson, and I'm writing this from my little cottage in Springfield, Illinois, where the morning sun filters through lace curtains I hung myself. At 73, my hands shake a bit as I hold this pen. But my heart is steady now, steadier than it's been in years. I need to tell you about the day I finally chose myself over everyone else's expectations, and how that choice saved what was left of my soul. It all started 3 years ago on a rainy Thursday evening in March. I was in my small apartment on Elm Street, the one I'd shared with my Harold for 12 years before the Lord called him home. I was watching the evening news when my phone rang with that urgent tone that every mother recognizes, the one that means trouble. "Mom?" Michael's voice was strained, barely above a whisper. "Mom, are you sitting down?" My son had always been the strong one, the one who fixed everyone else's problems. Hearing him sound so broken made my chest tighten with fear. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Are the children okay? Is Sarah hurt? We're going to lose the house, Mom." The words tumbled out of him like stones falling down a well. "The bank is threatening foreclosure. Sarah's hours got cut at the hospital again. They're down to skeleton crews, and she's only working 2 days a week now. I picked up extra shifts at the warehouse, but it's not enough. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage, and they want $47,000 or they'll start proceedings next month." $47,000. The number hung in the air between us like a death sentence. I could hear Sarah crying in the background, and somewhere beyond that, the television playing cartoons for my grandbabies. Emma, 8 years old with pigtails and gap-toothed smiles, and little Jacob, 5, who still called me Gamma and insisted I make him chocolate chip pancakes every time he visited. "I wouldn't ask if we had anywhere else to turn," Michael continued, his voice breaking. "I've tried everything. Talked to the bank, looked into loan modifications, even considered bankruptcy. But they want cash, and they want it now. I know it's too much to ask, but I didn't know who else to call." I closed my eyes and saw my grandbabies' faces, imagined them having to pack up their toys, leave their friends, maybe end up in some cramped apartment or worse. Emma had just started taking piano lessons at school. Jacob had finally made friends with the little boy next door. Their whole world was in that house on Maple Street, the house where Michael had carried Sarah over the threshold 8 years ago, where I'd rocked both babies to sleep in the nursery he'd painted yellow because they wanted to be surprised by the gender. "How much time do we have?" I asked, already mentally calculating the contents of my savings account. 2 weeks, maybe 3 if we're lucky. I thought about my nest egg. 43 years of teaching 3rd grade at Roosevelt Elementary, never missing a day except when Harold had his heart attack. I thought about the modest pension from the school district, the life insurance payout from Harold's policy, the certificates of deposit I'd been saving for my own uncertain future. At 73, I didn't have many years left to rebuild what I was about to give away. "Mom, are you still there?" "I'm here, baby. Don't you worry about a thing. Mama's going to take care of this. I can't let you do that. It's your retirement money, your security." "Michael James Henderson," I said, using the full name that had always made him straighten up as a child. "You listen to me. Money is just paper. Family is forever. You think I could sleep at night knowing my grandbabies were homeless when I had the power to prevent it?" Over the next week, I liquidated everything. The savings account I'd been building since 1978. The CDs Harold and I had purchased every year on our anniversary. I even sold my mother's pearl necklace and matching earrings, the ones she'd worn to her own wedding and passed down to me with the hope I'd give them to my son's bride someday. Sarah had never seemed interested in old-fashioned jewelry anyway. When I walked into First National Bank with a cashier's check for $47,000, the teller looked at me with a mixture of respect and concern. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Henderson? This is a substantial amount." "I'm sure," I told her, though my hands were trembling as I signed the papers. Michael cried when I handed him that check. Real tears, the kind I hadn't seen from him since he was 8 years old and broke his arm falling from the oak tree in our backyard. "Mom, I don't know how to thank you. We'll pay you back, every penny, I promise." I cupped his face in my hands, seeing both the man he'd become and the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Don't you worry about paying me back. Just take care of those babies and that sweet wife of yours." Sarah hugged me that day too, tears streaming down her face. "Dorothy, you saved us. I don't know what kind of people we'd be if we let our children become homeless. You're an angel." For a few months, everything seemed perfect. They invited me for Sunday dinners, and Sarah would always insist I take home leftovers. Michael called every few days just to check on me, sometimes bringing the children by for impromptu visits. I felt useful, needed, loved. But as the weeks turned to months, I began to notice subtle changes. Michael seemed stressed despite the mortgage being caught up. Sarah worked longer hours by choice now, picking up overtime shifts and weekend work. They were rebuilding their financial cushion, which was smart, but it meant less family time. My little apartment on Elm Street began to feel cavernous without regular visits from the grandchildren. Harold's chair sat empty by the window, and some evenings I found myself talking to it just to hear a voice in the silence. I'd make dinner for one and eat it while watching game shows, wondering what Emma and Jacob were doing, whether they needed help with homework, if they missed their gamma. That's when Sarah made her suggestion. It was a Sunday in late September, and I joined them for dinner as usual. The leaves outside were just beginning to turn, and Jacob was telling me about the squirrels he'd been watching in their backyard. Sarah seemed unusually quiet during the meal, exchanging glances with Michael in that way married couples do when they've discussed something privately. "Dorothy," she said as I helped clear the dishes, "Michael and I have been talking, and we have an idea we'd like to run by you." I paused in scraping plates, sensing something significant in her tone. "Of course, dear." "What is it?" "Well, you know how that downstairs bedroom just sits empty most of the time? And you've mentioned how quiet your apartment gets." She glanced at Michael for encouragement. "We were wondering if you'd like to move in with us, permanently." My heart leaped. The idea of being surrounded by family again, of hearing children's laughter every day, of being needed and wanted, it seemed like an answer to prayers I hadn't even known I was praying. "You could help with the kids," Michael added. "Emma could use help with her math homework, and Jacob still asks for you every night at bedtime. Plus, you wouldn't have to worry about rent or utilities. We could all save money." The practical benefits were obvious. My social security would stretch further without apartment rent. I could sell most of my furniture since they had everything we'd need. I could be the kind of grandmother I'd always dreamed of being. Present, involved, indispensable. "Are you sure?" I asked, hardly daring to believe it. "I don't want to impose—" "Impose?" Sarah laughed, though it sounded slightly forced even then. "You're family, and after everything you've done for us, it's the least we can offer." Within 6 weeks, I'd given up my lease, sold or donated most of my belongings, and moved into the downstairs bedroom of the house I'd saved from foreclosure. It felt like coming home. The first few months were everything I'd hoped for. I woke up early each morning to make Emma's lunch, peanut butter and honey sandwiches cut into heart shapes, apple slices with a note tucked inside that said, "Gamma loves you." I'd braid her hair while she ate breakfast, listening to her chatter about friends and teachers and the latest book she was reading. Jacob was my shadow in those early days. He'd follow me around the house, helping with laundry by handing me clothespins, helping in the kitchen by stirring bowls and sampling cookie dough. At bedtime, he'd insist on 3 stories minimum, curled up against my side while I read about brave mice and adventurous bears. I cooked dinner most nights, pot roast with vegetables the way Michael remembered from his childhood, homemade biscuits that filled the house with the smell of comfort, casseroles that stretched leftovers into hearty meals. Sarah would come home exhausted from her shifts at the hospital, and I'd have a plate waiting for her, sometimes with a cup of chamomile tea if she seemed particularly stressed. "Dorothy, you're such a blessing," she'd say in those early weeks. "I don't know how we managed without you. The house has never run so smoothly." I paid for groceries without being asked, slipping Sarah cash when she mentioned needing milk or bread, quietly stocking the pantry with staples and treats for the children. When Emma needed new school clothes, I took her shopping and paid for everything, delighting in her excitement over a purple sweater that brought out her eyes. When Jacob wanted a bicycle for his birthday, I drove to the toy store and picked out a red one with training wheels, along with a matching helmet and knee pads for safety. I wanted to be indispensable, to earn my place in their daily lives through usefulness and generosity. I wanted them to wonder how they'd ever managed without me. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, the atmosphere began to shift. It started with small things. Sarah began making comments about the thermostat, how I kept the house too warm, how the electric bill was higher than usual. She mentioned that I used a lot of hot water for my evening baths, suggesting I might shower in the mornings instead when rates were lower. She started buying different brands of food, cheaper versions of things I'd been purchasing, explaining that we needed to be more budget conscious. Michael grew distant, coming home from his warehouse job and disappearing immediately into his phone or the television. Our conversations, once warm and substantial, became perfunctory exchanges about weather and schedules. He stopped asking about my day or sharing stories from work. The children remained loving, but I began to notice that their parents redirected them when they wanted to spend time with me. "Gamma's tired," Sarah would say when Jacob asked me to play blocks. "Why don't you watch cartoons instead?" Or, "Emma, you need to do your homework in your room tonight. Don't bother Gamma." I tried harder. I deep cleaned the house from top to bottom every week, scrubbing floors until my arthritic knees screamed in protest, washing windows until they sparkled, organizing closets and drawers with military precision. I did everyone's laundry, not just washing and drying, but folding everything with hospital corners and sorting it into neat piles for each family member. I babysat whenever they wanted date nights, reading bedtime stories and helping with homework, making sure the children were bathed and settled before their parents returned. I never complained about short notice or late nights, never asked for anything in return except the occasional smile or word of thanks. But the gratitude continued to fade like old photographs. Conversations became shorter and more utilitarian. They'd have family discussions in their bedroom with the door closed, their voices low but urgent. I began to feel like an outsider in the house I'd saved, a guest who'd overstayed her welcome but didn't know how to leave gracefully. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in November, just 3 days before Thanksgiving. I'd spent the entire day preparing for the holiday, shopping with my own money for a turkey, stuffing ingredients, cranberries, sweet potatoes, all the fixings for a traditional feast. I'd driven to 3 different stores to find the specific brand of rolls Michael had loved as a child, the one that came in the distinctive red package and cost twice as much as the store brand. The kitchen was filled with delicious smells, onions and celery sautéing for stuffing, sweet potatoes roasting in the oven, turkey thawing in the refrigerator. I was standing at the stove mashing potatoes, adding butter and cream the way my own mother had taught me, when Sarah walked into the kitchen. She looked tired, which wasn't unusual after a 12-hour shift, but there was something else in her expression, a hardness I'd never seen directed at me before. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching me work, and I could feel tension radiating from her like heat from a furnace. "Dorothy," she said finally, her voice flat and cold. "We need to talk." I turned from the stove, concerned. "Of course, dear. What's wrong? You look upset." She crossed her arms over her chest, a gesture that immediately put me on guard. "This isn't working anymore." "What isn't working?" I asked, though something in my chest had already begun to tighten with dread. "This whole arrangement, you living here, it's not sustainable." I set down the masher with trembling hands. "I don't understand. Have I done something wrong? If you're unhappy with my cooking or cleaning—" "It's not about that," she interrupted, though her tone suggested it was about everything. "The truth is, Dorothy, you eat but don't help around here." The words hit me like a physical blow, so unexpected and cruel that I actually staggered backward against the counter. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I'd just heard. What do you mean?" I whispered. "I mean exactly what I said. You consume resources, food, utilities, space, our time and energy, but you don't contribute anything meaningful. Michael and I are struggling to rebuild our finances, and we can't keep supporting dead weight." Dead weight. The phrase echoed in my mind like a curse. I thought about the $47,000 I'd given them, the grocery bills I'd paid, the clothes I'd bought for the children, the countless hours I'd spent cooking and cleaning and caring for this family. "Sarah," I said quietly, my voice barely audible above the bubbling of the potatoes on the stove. "I paid for every ingredient in this kitchen. I bought the turkey in your refrigerator, the vegetables in your pantry. I saved your house from foreclosure with my life savings. She shrugged, a gesture so dismissive it felt like a slap. That was your choice, and that was almost a year ago. What have you done for us lately? I take care of your children every day. I clean your house, do your laundry, cook your meals. Things we never asked you to do, she said sharply. We're perfectly capable of managing our own household. We don't need you playing house with our lives. I stared at her. This woman I'd welcomed as a daughter, whose hospital bills I'd helped pay when Emma was born, whose tears I'd dried when she miscarried between Emma and Jacob. In that moment, I saw myself through her eyes. A burdensome old woman, taking up space, consuming resources, contributing nothing of value. Does Michael feel this way too? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Michael doesn't like confrontation. But yes, we've discussed it extensively. You need to find your own place, Dorothy. Soon. The kitchen fell silent except for the soft bubbling of potatoes and the hum of the refrigerator. I could hear Emma and Jacob playing in the living room, their innocent laughter a stark contrast to the cruelty happening just down the hall. How long do I have? I asked. We'd like you out by the end of the month. That gives you 2 weeks to find somewhere. 2 weeks. To find a new home. To rebuild a life I'd dismantled, to accommodate their needs. To somehow start over at 73 with a bank account I'd emptied for their benefit. I nodded slowly, not trusting my voice to remain steady. I understand. Sarah's expression softened slightly, perhaps recognizing she'd gone too far. Look, Dorothy, it's nothing personal. You're a nice woman, but this living situation just isn't working for our family anymore. I'm sure you'll be happier in your own place. After she left the kitchen, I stood at the stove for a long time, mechanically finishing the potatoes while tears dripped into the bowl. Everything I'd believed about my place in this family, my value as a grandmother and helper, crumbled around me like dry leaves. That night, I lay in the narrow bed in what I'd foolishly begun thinking of as my room, staring at the ceiling and replaying every interaction, every kindness I'd shown, every dollar I'd spent on people who saw me as nothing more than a burden to be endured. I thought about Harold, how he used to warn me that my generous heart would be my downfall. Dorothy, he'd say when I'd give away money we needed for our own bills, you can't pour from an empty cup. Take care of yourself first, because no one else will. I'd always thought he was too cynical, too suspicious of people's motives. Now I understood he'd been trying to protect me from exactly this moment. For 3 days, I barely spoke to anyone in the house. I watched Sarah and Michael laugh together at dinner, planning a weekend trip to Chicago they somehow could afford, despite claiming financial hardship. I saw them exchange knowing looks when they thought I wasn't watching, the kind of glances that said, "Soon she'll be gone and we'll have our house back." Emma asked me why I seemed sad, and I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to cry where she couldn't see. Jacob brought me a picture he'd drawn of our family, with me prominently featured as Gamma in purple crayon, and I had to step outside to compose myself. On Friday morning, while Michael was at work and Sarah had taken the children to school, I began packing. I didn't have much left. Most of my furniture had been sold or donated when I moved in. My clothes fit into 2 suitcases. A few photographs of Harold and me, of Michael as a baby, of Christmas mornings and birthday parties went into 1 small box. My mother's Bible, the one I'd read from every night for 60 years, fit in my purse, along with Harold's watch and the last few pieces of jewelry I hadn't sold to save their mortgage. 3 boxes and 2 suitcases. That's what remained of a 73-year life after I'd given everything else away for love. I left a note on the kitchen table where I'd prepared so many meals. Dear Michael and Sarah, thank you for allowing me to share your home for these months. I've found another place to live and will be moved out by this evening. Please don't worry about me. I'll be fine. Give Emma and Jacob my love and tell them Gamma will see them soon. With all my love, Mom. I drove across town to a small rental cottage I'd found in the classified ads, a tiny place on Elm Street. Ironically, just 6 blocks from the apartment I'd given up to move in with them. It was a shotgun-style house with 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen barely big enough for 1 person, and a living room with a brick fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The rent was $400 a month, manageable with my Social Security and the small pension I'd kept. The landlord, A kind man named Mr. Peterson looked concerned when I showed up with so few belongings. "You sure this is enough furniture, Mrs. Henderson?" he asked, helping me carry in my boxes. "It's perfect," I told him, and meant it. Every stick of furniture in this place would be mine, chosen by me, arranged to please no one but myself. Michael called within 2 hours of finding my note, his voice panicked and guilt-ridden. "Mom, what are you doing? Where are you? Come home right now." "I am home, sweetheart." "That's ridiculous. You belong here with us. Sarah was just having a bad day. She didn't mean what she said." "Maybe she didn't mean to be so cruel about it," I said gently. "But she meant what she said, and maybe she was right. Maybe it is time for me to live independently again." He tried to argue, to convince me I was overreacting, that they needed me, that the children would be heartbroken. But I'd made my decision, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace settling over me like a warm blanket. The cottage was smaller than any place I'd lived since I was first married, but it was mine. No one could call me a burden here, question my utility bills, or make me feel unwelcome in my own space. I spent the first week buying used furniture from estate sales and thrift stores, a small sofa that fit perfectly under the front window, a kitchen table just big enough for two, a comfortable chair for reading by the fireplace. Each purchase was carefully considered, measured not just for fit, but for joy. Did this lamp make me smile? Would this throw pillow brighten my day? For the first time in years, my happiness was the only consideration that mattered. I hung my photographs on the walls, arranged my books on simple shelves, and set up a small sewing corner where I could work on quilts and mending. The house began to reflect my personality in ways the bedroom at Michael's never could. Emma and Jacob were confused and hurt by my sudden departure, and Michael brought them by the following weekend with tears in their eyes and accusations on their lips. "Why did you leave us, Gamma?" Emma asked, her 8-year-old heart broken in the way that only children's hearts can be, completely and without reservation. I knelt down to her level, taking her small hands in mine. "Sometimes grown-ups need to live in their own houses, sweetheart. It doesn't mean I love you any less. It just means Gamma needed a place that was all her own." "But we need you," Jacob whispered, his 5-year-old logic unable to comprehend why someone who loved him would choose to live somewhere else. "And I need you too, baby boy. That's why you're going to visit me here every other weekend, and we'll bake cookies and read stories and play in my backyard. Won't that be fun?" Michael stood in my tiny living room looking guilty and uncomfortable, his eyes taking in the modest furnishings and small spaces. "Mom, this place is so small. Are you sure you're comfortable here?" "I'm more comfortable than I've been in months," I told him honestly. Over the following weeks, I established new routines that revolved around my own needs and desires for the first time in decades. I woke up when my body was ready, not when someone else needed breakfast. I ate meals I enjoyed rather than cooking what others preferred. I watched television shows that interested me, instead of surrendering the remote to someone else's choices. The silence that had once felt oppressive in my old apartment now felt peaceful. I could hear birds singing outside my kitchen window, could listen to music without worrying about disturbing anyone, could think my own thoughts without interruption. I started volunteering at Roosevelt Elementary, the school where I'd taught for 43 years. The current principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, welcomed me back with enthusiasm, remembering me as one of her most dedicated teachers. "Mrs. Henderson, would you consider helping in our reading program? We have so many children who could benefit from individual attention." Being back in a classroom, surrounded by eager 8-year-old faces, reminded me why I'd loved teaching. These children listened to my stories with rapt attention, laughed at my jokes, hugged me impulsively when I helped them sound out difficult words. They saw value in what I had to offer, appreciated my patience and experience. Soon, I was working 2 days a week as a reading volunteer, and Mrs. Rodriguez asked if I'd consider substitute teaching when regular teachers were absent. The modest pay supplemented my income enough that I could afford small luxuries: a new book, dinner at the local diner, a movie ticket for the matinee showing. I made friends with my neighbor, Agnes Murphy, a 78-year-old widow who tended the most spectacular rose garden I'd ever seen. We fell into the habit of sharing morning coffee on her front porch, talking about everything and nothing while watching the neighborhood wake up. Agnes had been widowed for 5 years and had her own stories about well-meaning children who wanted to manage her life. My daughter keeps insisting I should sell this house and move into one of those senior communities, she told me one morning while deadheading roses. She says it's too much work for someone my age. But you know what I told her? What's that? I told her I'd rather die in my own garden than live in someone else's idea of what's appropriate for old ladies. We laughed together, recognizing kindred spirits in each other. 6 months after leaving Michael's house, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Sarah, her voice small and uncertain, so different from the harsh tone she'd used that November evening. "Dorothy, it's Sarah. Do you have a minute to talk?" I was in my garden, planting tomatoes in the small plot I'd carved out behind the cottage. The afternoon sun was warm on my shoulders, and dirt under my fingernails felt like an accomplishment rather than something to be ashamed of. "Of course, dear. What can I do for you?" I wanted to apologize for what I said that night in the kitchen. It was cruel and unfair, and I've regretted it every day since you left. I sat down on my porch steps, surprised by the call, but not entirely surprised by the sentiment. "What brought this on?" "Emma's been asking for you constantly. She keeps asking why Gamma doesn't live with us anymore, why you moved away if it was because she did something wrong. And Jacob, he cries for you at bedtime sometimes. Michael tries to read to him, but it's not the same." I felt a familiar tug at my heartstrings, the old instinct to fix everyone else's problems, to sacrifice my own comfort for their happiness. But this time, something held me back. "They know they can visit me anytime," I said gently. "My door is always open to them." "I know, but it's not the same. The house feels different without you, empty somehow. And Michael, he's been so quiet and sad. I think he blames himself for not standing up to me that night." "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you remember what you said to me? About eating but not helping?" There was a long pause. "Yes, and I was wrong, so wrong. You did everything for us, cooking, cleaning, taking care of the kids, paying for things we needed. I don't know. I was stressed about money and feeling like I wasn't a good enough mother because you seemed to do everything so naturally with Emma and Jacob. I took it out on you, and that was inexcusable. I appreciate you saying that," I told her, and meant it. "But you know what? Moving out was the best thing I could have done for myself." "Really? Really. I'm happier now than I've been in years. I have my own space, my own routines, my own life. I'm volunteering at the elementary school. I've made new friends. I'm growing vegetables. I wake up every morning excited about the day ahead, instead of wondering if I'm being useful enough to earn my place in someone else's home." Another long pause. Would you consider moving back? If I promised, things would be different?" I looked around my little cottage, at the tomato plants I'd just set in the ground, at Agnes's roses blooming over the fence, at the book I'd left open on my porch table. This life I'd built was small, but entirely mine. "No, sweetheart, but thank you for asking." "I understand," she said, though her voice sounded disappointed. "But the kids can still visit, right? And maybe we could have Sunday dinners again sometimes? At your place?" "I'd love that," I said, and realized I meant it. The difference was that now they'd be guests in my home rather than me being a barely tolerated presence in theirs. Emma and Jacob visit every other weekend now, and those times are sweeter than any I can remember. We bake cookies in my tiny kitchen, with Jacob standing on a step stool to help mix ingredients, while Emma reads recipes aloud. We read books by the fireplace, all 3 of us squeezed onto my small sofa with a quilt pulled over our legs. They help me tend my garden, watering plants and pulling weeds with the serious concentration only children can bring to simple tasks. Without the tension of living arrangements hanging over us, our relationship has actually grown closer. They tell me about their friends, their school projects, their dreams and fears. Emma confides that she wants to be a teacher like I was, and we practice lessons using her dolls as students. Jacob still insists on 3 bedtime stories minimum. But now I look forward to reading them instead of feeling like I'm performing for an audience that might revoke my privileges. Michael visits occasionally, usually bringing flowers or groceries in a gesture that feels more like penance than generosity. He looks around my cottage with something that might be envy, commenting on how peaceful it seems, how everything has its place. "You look good, Mom." he said during his last visit. Rested. Happy. I am happy, I told him, offering him coffee from my own pot, served in my own cups, in my own time. I'm sorry about how everything happened. I should have stood up for you that night. Sarah was out of line, and I was a coward for not stopping her. Michael, you can't control what other people say or do. You can only control how you respond. I chose to respond by taking care of myself instead of waiting for someone else to do it. He nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. I just want you to know that I never thought of you as a burden. What you did for us, paying off the mortgage, it saved our family. I'll never forget that. I know you won't, sweetheart. But I've learned something important. Love shouldn't cost everything you have to give. Real love, healthy love, adds to your life instead of depleting it. Sarah hasn't visited my cottage yet, though she sends polite messages through Michael and always includes me in birthday party invitations. I think she's too embarrassed to face me directly, too ashamed of the person she became that November evening. Maybe someday she'll be ready for a conversation that might heal the rift between us, but I'm not holding my breath. I've learned to be content with what is, rather than constantly hoping for what might be. 8 months ago, I started taking art classes at the community center. I'd always wanted to try watercolor painting, but had never found the time between teaching and taking care of everyone else's needs. Now I spend Thursday evenings learning to capture the play of light on water, the delicate petals of Agnes's roses, the expressions on children's faces as they discover new words. My paintings aren't masterpieces. They're the work of a beginner with shaky hands and limited experience. But they're mine, created for the pure joy of creating, with no one to please but myself. I've hung several around my cottage, small celebrations of this new life I've built from the ashes of my old sacrifices. Yesterday was my 74th birthday, and Agnes surprised me with a small party on her front porch. She'd invited 3 other neighborhood widows, and we sat among her roses drinking iced tea and eating cake while sharing stories about our lives. Mrs. Chen talked about finally learning to drive at age 72. Mrs. Washington described the novel she was writing about her childhood in Mississippi. Mrs. Kowalski showed us pictures from her recent trip to Poland, the first time she'd traveled alone in 50 years of marriage. We were a collection of women who had spent decades defining ourselves through our relationships to others, as wives, mothers, grandmothers, caregivers. Now, in the latter chapters of our lives, we were finally learning to define ourselves by our own interests, dreams, and choices. Dorothy, Agnes said as we were cleaning up after the others had gone home, do you ever regret leaving your son's house? I considered her question carefully, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink above our quiet neighborhood. I regret that it took me so long to remember my own worth. I regret that I allowed myself to become so small in my own life that I forgot I deserved respect and kindness. But leaving? No, I don't regret that for a minute. Even though it meant less time with your grandchildren? The time I spend with them now is better quality because I'm not walking on eggshells, worried about whether I'm being useful enough to justify my existence. When they visit me, I can focus entirely on them instead of trying to prove my worth to their parents. Agnes nodded, understanding completely. My daughter called again yesterday about that senior community. She means well, but she can't understand that managing my own life, making my own decisions, even making my own mistakes, that's what keeps me feeling alive. Exactly. Independence isn't about rejecting help when we need it. It's about maintaining the right to choose how we live, what we value, who we spend our time with. As I sit here this morning, writing this letter in my sunny kitchen while coffee percolates and birds sing outside my window, I feel a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that brought me to this place. The pain of that November evening, the humiliation of being called dead weight, the fear of starting over at 73, all of it led me to this cottage, this life, this version of myself that I never knew existed. I'm not the same woman who handed over her life savings to save someone else's house. I'm not the same grandmother who tried to earn love through constant service and sacrifice. I'm Dorothy Mae Henderson, 74 years old, living exactly the life I choose to live, responsible to no one but myself and the people I genuinely choose to care for. This morning, Emma called to tell me about a story she wrote for school, A tale about a grandmother who lived in a magic cottage where everything was exactly the right size and every day was full of adventures. She asked if she could read it to me when she visits this weekend, and I told her I couldn't wait to hear it. Jacob called too, to tell me he lost his first tooth and the tooth fairy brought him $2. He wanted to know if I still had the special tooth fairy pillow I'd made for Michael when he was little, the one with the tiny pocket for teeth and wishes. I do have it, carefully preserved in my cedar chest, and I promised to bring it for his next sleepover. These phone calls, these connections made on their terms and mine, feel more precious than all the daily interactions I used to have when I lived under their roof. There's no obligation hanging over these conversations, no undercurrent of tension about whether I'm being sufficiently useful or appropriately grateful. They call because they want to share their lives with me, and I listen because I genuinely want to be part of their world. But on equal terms now, as a grandmother, they choose to include, rather than a burden they're obligated to tolerate. Last month, I did something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I started dating again. His name is Walter, and he's a retired postal worker who volunteers at the same elementary school where I help with reading. He has kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle way of listening that reminds me of Harold in the best ways. Walter lost his wife 2 years ago to cancer, and like me, he's learning to rebuild a life that had been entirely centered around caring for someone else. We go to the movies on Tuesday afternoons when tickets are cheaper, share coffee at the diner on Friday mornings, and take slow walks through the park where he tells me stories about the neighborhoods he used to serve on his mail route. He's met Emma and Jacob twice now, and they've decided he's acceptable because he knows magic tricks and always carries peppermints in his pocket. He doesn't try to replace Harold in my heart or their grandfather in their lives. He simply adds something new and sweet to the mix. When I mentioned Walter to Michael, I could see surprise and something that might have been concern flicker across his face. "Are you sure you're ready for that, Mom? It hasn't been that long since Dad died. Michael, your father has been gone for 4 years. How long should I wait to be happy again?" He didn't have an answer for that, and I realized he'd never really thought of me as a person with my own needs and desires separate from my role as his mother and his children's grandmother. To him, I was a supporting character in the story of his family, not the protagonist of my own life. "I just want you to be careful," he said finally. "Make sure he's not just after your money." I almost laughed. "Sweetheart, what money? I gave you my life savings, remember? Walter and I are 2 people on fixed incomes who split the check at the diner. Neither of us has anything the other one wants except companionship and conversation." That seemed to reassure him, though I wondered what it said about his understanding of relationships that he could only imagine someone wanting to be with me for financial gain. Agnes adores Walter, mostly because he helps her with yard work and never complains when she commandeers our coffee dates to lecture him about proper rose care. "He's a keeper, Dorothy," she told me last week while we watched him repair a loose board on her front porch. "Any man who'll listen to an old woman explain pruning techniques for 20 minutes without checking his watch is either very patient or very smitten." "Maybe both," I said, and felt a flutter of happiness at the possibility. 3 weeks ago, I made a decision that surprised even me. I applied for a passport. At 74, I've never been outside the United States, never seen an ocean or a mountain that wasn't in a postcard. Harold always said we'd travel when we retired, but his heart attack came before we could make those plans reality. Now, with Walter's encouragement and Agnes's enthusiastic support, I'm planning a trip to Ireland for next spring. It's something I've dreamed about since I was a little girl reading about castles and green hills in the library books my mother brought home. The tour is specifically designed for seniors, with comfortable buses and modest walking requirements, and the cost is manageable if I save carefully over the next few months. When I told Emma and Jacob about my travel plans, their eyes went wide with excitement. "Will you bring us back something from Ireland, Gamma?" Emma asked. "Will you take pictures of the castles?" Jacob added. "I'll bring you both something special, and I'll take so many pictures you'll be tired of looking at them," I promised. Michael's reaction was less enthusiastic. "Mom, are you sure that's wise? Traveling internationally at your age? What if something happens? What if you get sick or hurt?" "Then I'll get sick or hurt in Ireland instead of Illinois," I told him. "Michael, I could die tomorrow sitting in my own living room. I could live 20 more years. Either way, I'd rather spend whatever time I have left doing things that make me happy instead of sitting safely in a corner waiting for life to happen to me. Sarah, surprisingly, supported the idea. I think it's wonderful, Dorothy. You should see the world while you can. Life's too short to play it safe all the time. It was the first genuinely warm thing she'd said to me since our phone conversation months ago, and I felt a small crack appear in the wall of hurt I'd built around our relationship. The passport arrived last week, and I cried when I opened the envelope and saw my own photograph looking back at me from that official blue booklet. It seemed like such a small thing, but it represented something enormous. The right to go anywhere I wanted, to be Dorothy Henderson the traveler, instead of just Dorothy the mother, grandmother, helper, giver. Walter has his own passport and is considering joining the same tour, though we're both careful to maintain our independence, even as we grow closer. Neither of us wants to repeat the mistake of defining ourselves entirely through another person, no matter how much we care for them. Yesterday I received a letter that brought me to tears for the second time in a week, but these were tears of joy rather than sorrow. It was from Mrs. Rodriguez at Roosevelt Elementary, informing me that the school board had voted to name their new reading room in my honor. The Dorothy Henderson Reading Room will serve children for generations to come, the letter read, and we hope it will stand as a testament to your 43 years of dedicated service to education and your continued commitment to helping children discover the joy of reading. 43 years of teaching, hundreds of children whose lives I'd touched in small but meaningful ways, and now a room with my name on it where future students would learn to love books the way I'd taught their parents and grandparents to love them. It felt like a kind of immortality, a legacy that had nothing to do with the money I'd given away or the sacrifices I'd made for ungrateful family members. When I called Michael to share the news, he was genuinely happy for me. "Mom, that's incredible. You deserve that recognition. You were an amazing teacher." "I still am," I corrected gently. "Just because I'm not in a full-time classroom doesn't mean I've stopped teaching." The dedication ceremony is planned for next month, and Emma and Jacob have asked if they can attend. They want to see Gamma's special room and meet some of the children I work with now. I've already arranged for them to sit in on one of my reading sessions, where they can see firsthand why this work brings me such joy. As I finish writing this letter, the afternoon light is slanting through my kitchen window, illuminating dust motes that dance like tiny celebrations in the air. Agnes is in her garden, as she is every day at this time, and I can hear children playing in the street, their voices bright with the kind of carefree happiness that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. In a few hours, Walter will pick me up for dinner at the Italian restaurant downtown, the one where they know our names and always save us the corner booth by the window. Tomorrow, Emma and Jacob will arrive for their weekend visit and will make pancakes shaped like dinosaurs and build a fort out of couch cushions in my living room. Next week, I'll volunteer at the school, helping struggling readers sound out words and discover the magic hidden in stories. Next month, I'll watch a reading room receive my name, surrounded by people who value my contributions and celebrate my legacy. Next spring, I'll board a plane for Ireland, carrying a camera and a sense of adventure I thought I'd lost forever. This is my life now. Small, but entirely mine. Modest, but rich with purpose. Quiet, but filled with the kind of contentment that comes from finally understanding your own worth. If you're reading this story and recognizing yourself in my journey, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me decades ago. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Your worth is not measured by how much you sacrifice or how little space you take up in the world. You deserve respect that doesn't have to be earned through constant service. You deserve love that doesn't come with conditions. You deserve to live a life that brings you joy, not just utility to others. It took me 73 years to learn that lesson, but I'm grateful I learned it while there was still time to act on it. There's a whole beautiful world out there beyond other people's expectations, and you have every right to explore it on your own terms. The hardest part isn't walking away from people who don't value you, it's learning to value yourself enough to believe you deserve better. But once you take that first step, once you choose your own happiness over everyone else's comfort, you'll discover a strength you never knew you had. From my kitchen window, I can see Agnes working in her rose garden, and beyond that, the sunset painting the Illinois sky in shades of gold and pink. This view belongs to me now, Not because I bought it with someone else's gratitude, but because I finally had the courage to build a life that was truly my own. Tomorrow is another day full of possibilities, and for the first time in years, I can't wait to see what it brings. With love and hard-earned wisdom, Dorothy Mae Henderson P.S. Emma just called to tell me she got an A on her story about the grandmother in the magic cottage. She said her teacher wants to know if the cottage is real, and if so, whether she can visit it sometime. I told her the cottage is very real, and she's welcome anytime, as long as she promises to help me bake cookies and tend the garden. Some things, after all, are worth sharing.